Would you tell a carpenter that his hammer or his saw has built a nice deck? No. So imagine the frustration that a photographer feels when they're told their camera takes really nice pictures. When you hear a statement like that, it's hard to not get frustrated when all you can think of is the technical aspects of photography that had to be mastered before you could start producing those quality images. Like any other quality products available for purchase today, a trade has to be mastered before they go into that tier. Whether it's the engineering that goes into manufacturing a car or the artwork that went into famous paintings done by Picasso. My name is Jonathan Fitzwater, and I am majoring in communication studies with an emphasis in photography. Today, I'll be going over 4 major controls of digital cameras that a photographer really has to master before they can start producing those quality images. So let's start by defining what a digital camera actually is. According to Merriam-Webster, a digital camera is simply a camera that stores an image as a digital file instead of on film. There are 2 major types of digital cameras used today. They're DSLR and mirrorless. For the purpose of this speech, I won't be going into the differences amongst the two, rather the 4 major controls that are universal to both platforms. There are 4 controls that a photographer has to master before they can start wowing an audience with their images. Those 4 controls are the ISO, f-stops, shutter speed, and white balance. So first off, let's focus on what ISO is. According to Photography Talk, ISO, or International Organization of Standardization, is referring to a camera sensor's sensitivity to light. So most digital cameras have a base or low level ISO of 100 and go up to or well past 1600. So the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is to light. But in turn, the higher you crank the ISO, the more digital noise you're going to produce. Digital noise is just that grainy look that you see in images, make you feel like it's not quite at that professional level. And at this point, I would show the first image, or the first slide of my PowerPoint, that shows the difference in a picture taken at a level 100 ISO versus a level 3200 ISO, both of the same picture. Second is f-stops, which are also known as your aperture size. So according to Spencer Cox with Photography Life, your f-stop is what controls the amount of light that passes through a lens and strikes the sensor of your digital camera. So most digital cameras have a range of f2 to f22. And those are expressed as f/2 or f/22. So most people would think that the higher number, f22, allows more light, right? Not quite. So your f-stops are actually expressed as fractions. So f/2 equals 1 over 2, or 1/2. And f/16 equals 1 over 16, or 1/16. So what that means is at f2, your aperture is opened halfway. At f16, it's only opened a 16th of the way. So the smaller number, f2, actually lets in more light. It's kind of similar to a pupil. So if you're sitting in a dimly lit room, your pupil opens up to allow more light in. Whereas if you go outside on a bright sunny day with very little to no cloud coverage, your pupil gets smaller and it really constricts how much light is coming in. At this point, I would show my second slide, which shows the different aperture sizes in association to the actual number that they're expressed as. So your f-stop also controls your depth of field. So f2 would produce a really shallow depth of field. So your main subject, let's say a bride and groom, would be really sharp. They'd be nice, vibrant, where everything else would kind of be a little blurred as to not take focus away from your main subject. f22, on the other hand, would make sure that everything is at the same level of sharpness and clarity, so it'd be great for landscape photography. The third major control is your shutter speed. According to Brian Black, the author of DSLR Photography for Beginners, your shutter speed is the speed at which the shutter opens or closes and controls the exposure time. So a fast shutter speed of let's say 1/6000th of a second, would produce a very short exposure time. Whereas a slow shutter speed of 4 seconds would create a very lengthy exposure. So it's important that you always use the shutter speed that complements your f-stop. A general rule of thumb is f8 or f-stop 8, you would use a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. So if I open my aperture up, or I open my f-stop up to f4, I would have to decrease my shutter speed, my time, make it slower to constrict how much light is coming in. Whereas if I close it down to f22, I would have to increase the time that my shutter is open to let more light come in and properly illuminate the image. So the type of photography that you're participating in also determines the speed at which you want to use. If you're photographing a sporting event where players are running up and down a field, you want to use a faster shutter speed so you don't get motion blur as a player runs by. Whereas if you're photographing landscape or architecture, you're perfectly fine bumping it down to 2 to 4 seconds. At this point, I would show the third slide of my PowerPoint that goes over the differences in your shutter speed when you're trying to photograph a moving target. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're working with a slower shutter speed, 2-4 seconds, there's an aspect called camera shake. So as you're breathing, as your heart is beating, your body is naturally moving, which in turn moves the camera as you're holding it. It's inevitable. Unfortunately, it does make that blur in an image. Kind of bumps it down from that professional state. So when you're working with these longer times, it's always important to use an image stabilizing device, such as a tripod, that I'm currently using to film this speech. The fourth and final major aspect of photographing with digital cameras is your white balance. According to Nassim Mansurovi from Photography Life, white balance means adjusting the colors in the image so it looks more like a natural light. Digital cameras are designed to process a light source that we select in camera and convert it to a natural light, so a daylight. In order to actually successfully use that though, you have to know what type of light source you're photographing under. So some of the common light sources that you can select in camera are daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten, white fluorescent, flash, or custom color temperature. Now, custom color temperature is kind of a really advanced aspect. You would have to actually know the temperature of color that the light source is emitting to effectively use it. At this point, I would show my last slide that goes over the different white balances that you can select in camera and the different effects they have on an image. So once all 4 controls are mastered, a photographer can really unlock their potential and start creating those very vivid images. In conclusion, I've covered 2 important aspects of digital cameras. The first being I actually defined what a digital camera is, and next I explained the 4 major controls that one must understand in order to successfully utilize a digital camera. Now that you understand the science and the math that goes into successfully utilizing a digital camera, next time you see those pictures that really take your breath away, maybe you'll sit back and appreciate what a photographer had to learn and master to produce it. Thank you.